Hi, this is Mr. Heineman from Evergreen High School. This is for my Microsoft Imagine Academy classes. This is Excel 2013 Core, Lesson 3. So in Lesson 3, we're using formulas. And some things to know about Excel with formulas are, first of all, there's a whole tab with formulas and using formulas. So here's a bunch of functions that are pretty common, and you can access those. And we can insert one by clicking here. You can also insert a formula by clicking here, or you can simply start typing using the equal sign and then type your formula. And formulas are going to help us do calculations and other things in our sheets to make them much more useful. So to begin the online exercises, we're going to first open the marketing results workbook from the microsite student files. It's right here. And now that that's open, we're going to go ahead and save it as the student version in my Excel folder, and then we can get working on it. So what we're going to be doing in this is we're going to be using what we call cell references to get the values from each of these three worksheets summarized in this one worksheet. So we're going to borrow values, and that's what a reference is. We're referencing the cell names, so A4 and B4 in each of the other three worksheets on this worksheet to bring all that data into one place. And so we do that like we do with formulas. We start by typing an equal sign, and then we can start clicking. In this case, we want the inquiries for trade shows. So I'm going to click the trade shows worksheet and click on A4 there, and you'll notice it up here displays trade shows, which is the name of the worksheet, and then an exclamation point saying we want a cell from there, and it's A4 is the cell we want. So when I hit enter, now that value appears in the trade shows cell, or the inquiry cell for trade shows on this in B4. And then I could do the same thing for the other two. So for online equals online inquiries, and hit enter, and then the same thing for print ads. Okay. Now what's nice about cell references is that if A4 is the current reference on each of those worksheets, if I use autofill, it'll automatically move over one column on each of those and grab the B4 value as well. So if I click and drag with autofill, you'll see those numbers are correct for the new members. So I can use autofill with cell references, and the cell reference will change depending on what cell was originally selected. So if you go over columns, it will also take cells from over columns, or if you go down, it'll add rows. So this one we're going to save, and then you're actually going to keep this one open for the next exercise. So in this exercise, we're actually going to be using some of the actual formulas or functions in Excel. And what we're going to do is we're going to first find the total number of inquiries. And in Excel, the total number is called a sum. So we can click on Insert Function, and we can select Sum, and it'll add up all the numbers. And if we click OK, it'll move us on to the next screen where it's going to ask what the function arguments are. And notice it already put some stuff in there for us. It gave us cell references from B4 through B6. That's what the colon means, is through. So B4 through B6, and that's these three cells here. And we can always collapse these down to make sure we've got the right cells. That's these three right there. It kind of figured that we wanted those three. So then we expand this back out, and if we click OK, it'll now show us the sum of all three of the inquiry cells. We can also do this for new members, and just like with cell references, functions will also change their cell references if you use autofill. So if I just use autofill here, it'll actually expand over, and you can see that's the correct sum for all the new members. Okay. Now we also need to figure out how to find the largest value in each of the inquiries. So we can click on the insert function if we don't know, and we see, oh, here's max. Max sounds like it's correct, and it says it returns the largest value in a set of values, which is what we're looking for. And it ignores logical values in text. So anything that's not a number, it's going to ignore. So now if I click OK, now it thinks that I want to do all 4 of these cells when I really just want these 3. So I'm going to go ahead and change that and reselect just those 3 and come back here and click OK. And it gives me 100, which is correct. The smallest is a different function, and doesn't look like we see it in our most recently used, so we should check and see what category it might fit in. And if we go to math and trig, that's usually a good spot for mathematical ones, although I don't see anything that sounds like or looks like it's gonna give me the smallest. So I'm wondering if maybe lookup is a better choice. And it doesn't seem like it's there either. So information maybe. And we can just keep looking. Worst case, we can go to all and find it if we don't know where to look. And we're going to keep scrolling and scrolling. And I think I'm looking for something. If max was the largest, I think I'm looking for something like min. Here we go. Min returns the smallest number in a set of values. And just like max, it ignores logical values in text. In this case, I'm going to select these 3. Click OK, and I'm done. I can also type in formulas, and in this case, average, there's a formula called average, I know that, so I'm going to type that in. Average, and then I'm going to average the 3 of those. Click, and there it is. I can also, with these 3, go ahead and expand these over so that we find the largest, smallest, and the average for those as well. And then we can save and close out and be ready for the next exercise. So now we're going to get some more practice with the sum function. So we're going to open a new file from the microsite student files. And this one is called Bun Baker. And just like before, we're going to go ahead and save this as our student file. And then we're going to go ahead and start getting totals. And we're going to enter a formula that calculates the total for the Broadway store, which we already know is sum. So I'm going to type it in this time. Sum, and then select my cells that I want to sum, and hit enter. And it sums those. And then I can enter formulas here if I wanted to. Me personally, I prefer to use autofill because I know it works, but it's not a big deal if you do it. So I'm going to use autofill for that. And then for the total of each type of bread, we do the same thing, sum, and then this time we're going to scroll across and close it. And then just like earlier, I can use autofill for the rest of those as well, and I can get the total amount of bread down here at the bottom, and then I can save this, and we're ready for the next exercise. So in this exercise, we're going to get a chance to work more with formulas. So I'm going to start by opening up a new student file called Sweet Stuff Manufacturing. And I'm going to move this one over to the right. We're of course going to save as, and in my Excel folder, save it as the student version of this file. And then in row 23 here, we're going to add in the total amount of production for each day. So we'll use the sum function for that. And once I've got that, you know me, I like autofill. I'm going to use autofill all the way across for every day. We're also going to do the totals for each production item in each row, and we'll store those in column I. So sum them across, autofill down, and then I'm going to add a total heading at the top. Column J, we're going to do averages. So we're going to average all the days for each item to find the average for per item. Add a label at the top for average. I'm also going to add a daily total label for the daily totals row, and then we'll add a daily average for each day, and we'll use the average function to find the average for each day. And that way we can get all the averages, and then we could take a look at this and analyze it and figure out where could we save money, what could we lower production on or increase production on, find ways to save some money. Right now we're just going to save, and we're ready to move on to the next set of applications. So for this first creative application, we're going to open up a file from the microsite student files called Points and Titles. And I'm going to move that to the right. I'm going to save it as the student version in my Excel folder. And then we're going to go ahead and do what we need to do. In this case, we're using what are known as conditional functions. Conditional functions are if-then statements. So if something is true, we're going to display one thing, and if something is false, if that same thing is false, we're going to display something different. In this case, we have a bunch of members, a bunch of their points, and then we're going to assign them a title and say whether they can use a nickname based on their point totals. Okay, so the titles are over here, these three titles with these point levels. A nickname, they can use a nickname if they are a green soul. So that one is easy enough, it's straightforward. So I'm going to use the insert function button. We're using the if statement in the logical category. Click OK, and then you see it has three spots for us to enter things. First one is a logical test. So I'm testing, like, what am I checking? What am I saying is true or false? So in this case, we're checking the number of points greater than or equal to 750. Because if they're at least 750, then they're a green soul. And if that's true, we're simply going to use the word yes, that they can use a nickname. And if not true, then we're simply going to use the word no. And you'll notice up here as it's building the formula for us. So if logical statement, comma, what is the value if it's true, comma, and the value if it's false. Now when I click OK, it enters the formula in and then evaluates it and figures out that yes belongs here. And now I can use autofill to bring it all the way down to check everybody else, and that looks like it's right because this first one and these last three that are all above 750. Everybody else is less than 750. So now to do the title. The title is tricky because there are three different titles with three different point levels. And that means we have to use if functions inside of the if functions. And that's called nesting. What that means is when I start, I'm going to type if and check my first point level. In this case, we're going to check from the top down. So I'm going to check if the points are at least 750. That means they're a green soul. If not, then I'm going to start a new if statement to check if they're a weary soul. So clicking on the same cell there, greater than or equal to 500, and that's weary soul. If that's false, then I got to check for wandering soul. So I open a new if statement, using the same cell, but this time checking if it's at least 100. And that one is wandering soul. And if that's false, then they don't get a title. So we're just going to leave it blank. And to type a blank, we're just going to use 2 quotation marks. It's just like we typed without adding anything between the quotation marks. Now as I close each set of parentheses, because I have to close all 3 of them, you're going to notice that as I close them, the corresponding open parenthesis will light up for a moment. So that one, and they're different colors too. So that this one closes this last if statement, and the next one closes the second one, and then my final one there closes the first if statement. So now when I hit enter, it should display the correct title, which it does, Green Soul. And now I can use autofill to fill it all the way down, and then we make sure that our cells are working right. So this formula looks like it's working because less than 100, no nickname or no title. At least 100, but less than 500, Wandering Soul, 500 to 750, Weary Soul, over 750, Green Soul. And so with that, we can save and move on to the next application. So in this next creative application, we're going to use a file called Snowfall Expectations from the microsite student files. And we're going to move this to the right. And of course, as always, our first thing to do is to save as the student version, and then we can start to work on it. So in this case, what we're going to do is we are going to use absolute and relative cell references. So what that means is when I hit equals and enter a cell reference, either by clicking or typing, remember when I've done this before with formulas, and I know that if I use autofill for the formulas, the cell references will change so that it'll reference new cells relative to that old one. So if I copy and paste this somewhere, the cell reference changes depending on where I'm at. So in this case, I started and I referenced C5. Well, I went over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows, or 6 columns, and down 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, which means the cell reference should change by 6 columns and 4 rows. It should go over to column I, and it should reference cell 9, or row 9, which it does. So, and you notice it's the one just above the cell I pasted the formula into. So, the way I can prevent Excel from making changes like that is using $signs. So if I put a $sign just in front of the column, and I copy and paste it, the column doesn't change, but the row does. So it went down 3 rows, but in this case it didn't change the column at all. So it just went down 3 rows. And the same thing works for rows. So if I get rid of the $sign here and I add a $sign in front of rows, it won't change the column, it'll change just the row. Or I'm sorry, it won't change the row, it'll just change the column. So now it references I5 instead of C5. Okay, because it only will change the column. If I add $signs to both, it won't change either. And so it'll use that cell no matter where I'm at on the worksheet. So we're going to use a mixture of that to type in a single formula and then use it for this whole, and copy and paste it to this whole thing. Which means we're going to multiply this number times this number, because that's how we're going to calculate it. But we need to, as we go, so if we go to the right, even though I want this column to change for the red cells, I don't want the column to change for the blue cells. So I'm going to put a $sign in front of the B in the blue reference so that it uses column B at all times. But I still want, as I go down, to reference cells in the next row, the correct cell in the next row. I just don't want this row to change for the red one. So I'm going to add a $sign in front of the 5 in the red reference. So now when I hit enter, of course I get my correct value. And then I can use autofill going across, and I get the correct values there because Excel only changed the column, it didn't change the row. And now when I select all three and go down, it also just changed the row for the first reference and not the column. And it didn't change the row for the red references. So I made sure I calculated the correct values by using the $signs to do absolute referencing. So this is correct. We're good. We can save and move on. So in this next creative application, we need a new microsite student file. This one is called Amalgamated Consolidated Income Statement right at the top. So now, of course, save it as your student version, and then we got a few things to do. We're going to calculate total expenses. We're going to get a net income, which is revenue minus expenses, find an average revenue, and then average expense per division, and an average expense per item. So in all of these, we know all these formulas. For total expenses, we're going to use sum, and we're just summing all of these. And that's the same across the board, so we can use autofill across. Okay. With the net income is revenue minus expenses, and that's going to be the same again across the board, so I'm going to use autofill on that too. The average revenue is only for the total, and that's going to be the average of all the divisions. So I'm going to use an average there, but I'm averaging just these numbers up here. I only need to do this once because I only need this, the total average. Okay, and there's the average revenue. The average per division for expense is going to be the average of these expenses. So, and this one, I don't do one for the first column because I'm not worried about the average expense overall. I'm just worried about the average expense per division. Okay, and then I can use autofill to fill that in. And of course the average expense per item, we're going to do another average, and this time going across. Okay, so I hit enter there, and then I can drag these down. And that, I think, is it. I can save this and move on. In this last creative application, we're going to open up a file called Cash Receipts Analysis. And of course, just like we normally do, save the file as our student version, and then we can do our work. So in this case, we're calculating, using appropriate formulas to calculate the amount of cash that should be coming in after each time period. So 30, 60, 90, or 120 days. Which means that we actually can't start until October because that would be after 30 days. So in October, I would get 60% of this value from September. So I'm going to multiply this number times by this one. However, I want to make sure that when I drag this down, that my amount here, like this reference, doesn't change. So I need to use the $sign in front of the 4 to keep the row from changing when I scroll down and leave it there. I could also play it safe, and I know I just want the row to change here, not the column. And I can use a $sign in front of that just to play it safe. So that now when I drag this down, it goes all the way down, and that's fine. For 60 days, of course, I can't start that until November. So I would get 60 for 60 days. That would be still back to September. So it's still this same one, but we're multiplying it by this. And again, I'm going to add a $sign there and a $sign there just to play it safe. Okay, and that one will go all the way down. For 90 days, of course, I have to start that in December, but still reference September. And then again, add my $signs where I need them. Bring that all the way down. And then, of course, 120 days, same thing. Start in September. Change my cell referencing to absolute for a couple of things. Drag that down. And then while I'm at it, I might as well add the totals. That just sums all of these. Okay. And I can go ahead and drag this all the way across, because even though there's blank cells, it won't count them in the average if they're blank. And that's pretty much it. We can save this, and we're finished with lesson 3.